Hey guys, tonight we step softly into the dark woods, where Rome meets the edge of the map, and the map stops working. You're soaked to the bone again, your breath fogs in the crisp air, and your boots squelch through mud that seems to never dry. The sky above you is a thick sheet of gray wool, filtering moonlight down in milky, half-hearted beams. You don't know exactly where you are, only that you're not where you should be. You are following orders. But now your unit is scattered, the forest is swallowing voices, and the trees feel like they're watching. Behind you a twig snaps. You spin. Nothing. Ahead, the trail you just came from is gone, not overgrown, gone, like the forest itself has changed its mind. Welcome to Germania, land of endless forest, unknowable tribes, and the Roman Empire's worst decisions. If mellow history helps you relax, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind later. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. What time is it where you are? How are you feeling? Now, take a breath, close your eyes if you want to, and come with me into the trees. You are part of a patrol, a simple one, the kind the Empire did by the thousands, recon and reassure, count the villages, mark the map, nod at the locals, keep things Roman. Except this part of the forest? It doesn't do Roman. The torches went out around sunset. Strange, that. All at once, too. Then the horses started acting up, snorting, bucking, wild-eyed like something invisible was howling. And then the guide disappeared. No scream, no blood. One moment there, next moment, not, like he'd melted into the mist. You remember your centurion muttering something about barbarian tricks, and then silence. No bird song, no distant campfires, just fog and moss, and the growing realization that you don't belong here. This wasn't the first time Roman soldiers disappeared in these woods, but it was the first time in years. The Empire had grown confident, fat with success, spoiled on conquest, used to maps that bent under boot heels. Even here, east of the Rhine, governors like Publius Quinctilius Varus were building roads and collecting taxes like everything was normal. It wasn't normal. Ask the locals if they spoke your language, which they usually didn't, not really. A few broken phrases, some Latin, some tribal dialects, mostly just nods, glares, and a weird habit of laughing right after answering questions. That wasn't comforting. But to the brass back in Rome, Germania was on its way to becoming a province, just like Gaul had been. Just a few stubborn chiefs left to bribe or beat, send more officers, offer Roman citizenship, build amphitheaters and aqueducts. What could possibly go wrong? Historians still argue whether Rome ever truly understood what lay east of the Rhine, whether they really believed it could be tamed, or if they just couldn't stand a hole on the map. Germania Magna, as Rome called it, wasn't a unified place. It was a mess of trees and clans and grudges. Dozens of tribes, each with its own gods, its own chiefs, and usually a couple of brothers trying to stab each other for power. The Cherusci, the Chatti, the Marcomanni, the Bructeri, and many more. All fiercely independent, often at each other's throats. But they had one thing in common. They hated outsiders telling them what to do. Especially outsiders in sandals. But you wouldn't know that from the reports coming into Rome. Those were optimistic. Governor Varus? Totally confident. He believed the tribes were more bark than bite. Just needed Roman law, Roman roads, Roman taxes. That was the usual Roman recipe for success. Civilize with culture, back it with legions. And so the legions marched. Now, here you are, somewhere near the Teutoburg forest. Though no one calls it that yet. You don't know the name of this place, only that it smells of pine and decay, and the air has gone very still. You come to a clearing. Bodies. Not yours, not your unit. Old ones. Armored. Stripped. Half-eaten by time. And one still has a gladius through the ribcage. You turn around, but the trail is gone again. Welcome to the Empire's blind spot. The funny part? Romans loved maps. They made excellent ones, for roads, rivers, territories. But this part of the world, it was just trees. One big green smudge with question marks. Even now, some scholars debate just how little Rome knew about Germania. Did they have spy networks, friendly chiefs, secret cartographers? Maybe, maybe not. What we know is this: they didn't control it. They tried. Oh, did they try? But control requires understanding, and understanding requires respect. Rome didn't respect the forest. The tribes did. To them, this wasn't wilderness. This was a home, a sacred place, a living thing. They knew where to hunt, where to hide, which trees to tap for water, which bogs to avoid because of the ghosts. Yes, ghosts. Ask a local. One fringe theory even claims some Germanic tribes used the forest acoustics to communicate. Whistles, rustling signs, coordinated echoes, like a living walkie-talkie. Is it true? Who knows? But it makes a spooky kind of sense, doesn't it? Especially when the trees start whispering. You huddle under an overhang, trying to keep your torch lit. The wind howls like a dying horse. The rain has picked up again, sharp, stinging. You check your gear, mutter a prayer to Mars, and wonder how many other patrols are still out here. You won't find out, because you are no longer in control of the story. You're a Roman in the woods, and the woods have teeth. You kneel low, still as stone, one hand resting on the hilt of your gladius. The trees around you don't move, but somehow you feel them shifting, watching, not eyes, not really, but presence. Something's out there, and it's not Roman. From the shadows, a voice cuts through the mist. Latin, crisp, correct. You're lost. You jerk toward the sound. A figure steps forward, cloak, beard, broad shoulders. His armor is Roman issue, but the way he wears it is not. His face. Something's off. Not fear, not arrogance, just control. You've never seen this man before, but something about him feels like home and threat, like a wolf wearing the general's cloak. You've just met Arminius. He speaks your language because it was his language, because he grew up in Roman barracks, because Rome took him in as a political hostage when he was a boy, raised him on Latin grammar and imperial discipline. He trained as an auxiliary cavalryman, then officer, fought for the empire, bled for it. He was the model barbarian turned citizen. Rome patted itself on the back. Look how well it works. See how we civilize. Except Arminius wasn't civilized. He was watching and waiting. At this moment in your story, he's not your enemy. He's your superior, technically. Still serving Rome, still saluting flags and giving reports. You might have passed him on the road last week and nodded without thinking. Another officer and another fancy helmet. But his eyes were always watching the trees. You don't know that he's already been speaking with his kin in secret, that he's sent coded messages, that he's laid a quiet trap, not with swords, but with trust. You don't know that Varus, your commander, relies on him, that Arminius has become indispensable, fluent, loyal, respected. You just know that he smells more like the forest than the camp. Historians still debate what Arminius truly believed. Was it tribal pride, a calculated power grab, revenge for what Rome had done to his people? Or was he simply a man caught between two identities, neither of which fit? What's certain is this: he knew Rome from the inside, its arrogance, its rhythms, its blind spots. He was the wolf that learned to wear the shepherd's voice. And now he was preparing to howl. He walks beside you now, torchlight dancing across his face. He asks about your patrol, where you're stationed, what you've seen. It sounds casual, but you feel like every word is being weighed. You answer carefully. He nods slowly, then says, "This forest, it doesn't belong on your maps." You half laugh, unsure, but he doesn't smile. Later at camp, you'll mention him to another soldier, maybe over wine or rations. They'll say something like, "Oh yeah, Arminius. Good man, knows the land, smart." And they'll be right. He does know the land. In fact, he's drawing it in his head. Every ridge, every ravine, every place the Roman column might stretch too thin. He knows where the wagons slow, where the cavalry struggles, where the trees lean just close enough to swallow a man whole. He's building a battlefield where no one else sees one. Back in Rome, Germanicus is giving speeches. He's a golden boy, young, charming, born from bloodlines practically tattooed with glory. His uncle is the emperor. His wife is beloved. His enemies are mostly quiet because, frankly, he's too likable to hate. And he wants Germany. Not just visits, not just outposts. He wants to finish what Caesar started. There's a statue of Caesar in the Forum that shows him pointing toward Gaul, the conquest that made him. Germanicus wants a matching one, pointing east. But Germania doesn't work like Gaul. It's not cities and roads and farmers in tunics. It's wolves, forests, rivers that twist like lies, and tribes who look at your aqueduct and think, why would I want a stone water snake when the river's right there? Still, Germanicus is undeterred. He starts preparing supplies, legions, maps, which will prove mostly useless. But that's a story for later. For now, your boots crunch frost as Arminius vanishes into the mist. There's an amphitheater in a Roman colony near the Rhine. It's modest, a little mossy around the edges, but it still holds games. Today, there's a demonstration. Mock battles, some gladiators, a few tribal reenactments, for entertainment, of course. A pair of Germans are brought out, volunteers or prisoners. It's unclear. They pretend to charge a Roman fort made of wood and canvas. The crowd laughs as the Romans repel them with ridiculous ease. You sit in the stands chewing dried fruit, watching the fake war. The man next to you mutters, "Barbarians? Never stood a chance." You nod, but your hands feel cold. You can't stop thinking of the woods, and of Arminius. Rome has always played with spectacle. It makes enemies into mascots, war into theater. When they conquered Gaul, they threw parades in the capital, painted prisoners in gold dust and marched them through cheering streets. By making you laugh at your enemy, they make you stop fearing him. It works, until it doesn't. One odd detail, the mock fort in the show. It's the wrong shape, completely impractical, but no one notices or cares, because it's not about tactics, it's about confidence. And confidence is dangerously close to blindness. You hear a rumor that Arminius is gathering locals for a scouting mission. Nothing formal, just some light survey work, maybe some training drills, standard stuff. Varus approves it without blinking. Why wouldn't he? Arminius is loyal. He's one of us, right? You head to sleep under leather tents. The night is colder than it should be. Some say the wind sounds strange, like it's echoing. Others say they heard drumming, soft, distant, like it was under the ground. But by dawn, the sky clears, and Arminius is gone again, with a dozen men who didn't come back. You wake to shouting. Not alarm, not chaos. Just that clipped, impatient tone that always means someone dropped a water skin or forgot to pack a shovel. The army doesn't panic unless a general tells it to. But you sit up fast anyway, because your dreams were strange again. Trees, drums, a scream that turned into a laugh. You shake it off, just the fog playing tricks on your brain. Again. Still, you scan the horizon. The mist hasn't lifted yet. You notice something else. Arminius still isn't back. Officially, no one seems concerned. Officers say he's likely deep in the hills with a scouting party. You overhear someone joke, probably off having drinks with those squirrel-charming cousins of his. Laughter. But you're starting to feel it now, that invisible itch, like you're sitting too close to a fire, but there's no flame, like the ground is humming and no one else notices the tune. You're not the only one. There's a restlessness in the camp, troops sharpening swords that were already sharp, talking too fast, avoiding eye contact. The horses, skittish, like they're remembering something you haven't learned yet. And still, the mist doesn't lift. Far from camp, in Rome's marble heart, Germanicus is rehearsing, not for war, not yet, but for approval. The Senate adores him. The people call him the next Alexander. His lineage glows with divine PR, descendant of Augustus, married to Agrippina the Elder, whose bloodline traces back to actual gods, according to family legend anyway. He throws games. He speaks with dramatic pauses. He reads the winds in the empire's political sky and knows which way to point. But behind his charm lies something more dangerous, ambition with imagination. Germanicus believes in the frontier myth, The idea that Rome hasn't finished its story until it swallows every last corner of the map. And that includes Germania. Back near the Rhine, Rome has been hard at work constructing what it calls permanent infrastructure. In practice, timber forts, roads carved through roots and bogs, bridges over rivers that try to eat them by morning, watchtowers that creak in the wind. It's not built to last, but it's built to send a message. We're not going anywhere. The problem? Neither are the tribes. And they've been listening. Somewhere deeper in the forest, Arminius is sitting in a smoky hut, speaking his mother tongue. He speaks quickly, urgently, names are passed around, symbols etched in ash on the ground. 3 circles, 1 path. He points with a charred stick. A child outside plays with a Roman coin, flipping it like it's a game. It lands heads, then tails, then heads again. Inside, they plan the fall of 3 legions. Arminius knows Rome's rhythms. He knows when they march, how they camp, which centurion is cautious and which one is lazy. He knows their supply chains, how fast the wagons move, where the terrain narrows, which route seems safe but turn to mud when it rains. And he knows Varus. Oh, Varus. Publius Quinctilius Varus is the kind of man Rome loves to promote. Connected, loyal, efficient, but he's also the kind of man who believes the world works like a spreadsheet, that people are predictable, that loyalty is bought with silver and sealed with parchment. Arminius doesn't hate him, but he knows he's soft. You remember Varus's speech 2 nights ago, something about bringing law to the wild, and how Germania just needed more structure. It was fine, boring really, but now you think about it differently. Because no one claps for a speech in the woods, and the trees don't care about Roman law. Meanwhile, Germanicus is pushing for funding, more troops, more ships on the Rhine. He's using Teutoburg rumors, the ones that haven't yet reached the Senate floor, to argue that Rome must act decisively and soon. He's not wrong, but he's also not fast enough. Because the real storm is already gathering, not in the Senate, in the forest. A few quirky tidbits trickle through the camp. A merchant swears he saw a village emptied overnight, chickens still in cages, bread still warm. A scout claims to have found a bone charm tied to a Roman helmet hanging from a tree. One of the slaves whispers that wolves have been howling in circles, always in 3s. 3 howls. 3 legions. But hey, maybe it's just superstition. You hope. Historians still argue whether Varus truly trusted Arminius, or just didn't know how not to. Some say he ignored warning signs. Others believe he was too arrogant to imagine betrayal. A fringe theory? That he knew somewhere deep down, but couldn't admit it to himself, because admitting it would mean everything he believed about empire was a lie. The truth? He signs the marching orders anyway. And so, the column begins to move. Slow, winding, overconfident. You are now part of something big. The legions are stretching forward, mile by mile, into thicker trees and unfamiliar soil. The wagons groan, the engineers complain. The signal horns sound flatter than usual, like the forest is swallowing the echoes. You pass a clearing with a strange scent. It smells like smoke. Not campfire smoke, like a warning. As the column twists through a narrow ravine, you catch sight of a totem nailed to a tree. Antlers, feathers, something painted in what might be blood. Your comrade laughs nervously. They really think this scares us? You don't answer, because part of you isn't sure. 3 legions, more than 15,000 men. Veterans, engineers, officers, civilians. And somewhere ahead of you, the road bends, just a little too sharp. Just enough for someone waiting behind the trees to smile. You sleep that night with your gladius drawn, not because of orders, but because the wind started to sound like footsteps, and you remembered what Arminius said. This forest doesn't belong on your maps. The column stretches like a spine through the undergrowth, long, slow, and too confident for its own bones. You march near the middle, shield slung and sandals already full of mud. The trees grow tighter, the mist settles lower. The sound of armor, normally sharp and rhythmic, now muffles into the moss. Everything feels just a little off. But no one says it, Because the orders are clear, and because saying it would make it real. Roman legions are built on precision, discipline, formation, square shields and locked ranks, coordinated movements drilled 100 times over on dry, flat parade grounds. But the forest doesn't care about your drills. The path curves sharply again. Too sharply. You round the bend, and suddenly the front of the column is out of sight. That shouldn't happen. You glance around. The trees lean in so close they could kiss. There's no room for clean maneuvering here. The wagons start to lag. One of the rear units calls out, something about a snapped axle. Another complains about the mud. It's not just wet, it's grabbing, like it has fingers. You keep walking, because there's no other choice. Welcome to Rome's wooden blind spot. You weren't trained for this. None of you were. You were trained to fight in fields, on roads, in open air, not in a hallway of pine and rot. Your shields bang awkwardly against branches. Your formation crumples and reforms, then crumples again. The line bends, not fatally, yet. But this is not how a Roman army is supposed to look. Up ahead, a centurion shouts. The column halts. You wait. And wait. No explanation. Then the horns sound again, frustrated, short blasts, and the march resumes. You trudge on, heart ticking a little louder. This forest, historians say, was part of the ancient Teutoburg region, though the exact location is still argued today. Some claim it wasn't one forest, but several, strung together by confusion and bad luck. Others say the name Teutoburg didn't even exist yet, and was added later by chroniclers trying to make sense of something senseless. Either way, the Romans didn't call it by name. They called it obnoxious. Your boots slip again, the mud is sucking harder. You glance to your left, a horse stumbles. To your right, a supply cart tips, its contents spilling into brambles. No one laughs, not anymore. You look up, and for the first time, you realize the trees are watching. Not metaphorically. Literally. There are faces. Painted ones, dozens. Staring from the bark, red eyes, black smears, strange curling runes. Some are fresh, some are old, some are dripping. You don't know the meaning, but the message is clear. You're not welcome. One of the legion's interpreters mutters a half joke. Good thing they're superstitious, huh? But even he looks pale. He knows what the symbols mean, at least roughly. Warnings, curses. Some of them mark old burial grounds. One even refers to Nerthus, a tribal earth goddess, placid until insulted, then known for swallowing men whole. A priestess once drowned a Roman scout in a lake as an offering to her. Fringe history? Maybe, but right now it feels very real. You pass a burned-out homestead, empty, charred timbers still warm, no bodies, just silence. It was too recent to be raided, and too deliberate to be accidental. And nailed to the doorframe, upside down, is a Roman eagle standard. That's not just insult. That's invitation. And someone, somewhere, is smiling. Varus rides up and down the column, barking orders. He's annoyed, not afraid. That's the most dangerous kind of commander, one who confuses confusion for incompetence. He believes this is just bad luck, a setback, maybe a prank. He's not wrong about the setback. He's just catastrophically wrong about the prank. The scouts report that the friendly tribes haven't been seen in days. Villages are empty, trails are gone, maps are suddenly wrong. But again, no panic, because the Roman machine doesn't panic until it breaks. That night, you set camp in a clearing that's too small. Tense crowd, fires sputter, no singing, no dice games. Just tense sharpening of blades and whispered prayers to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. A soldier near you tells a story, barely a whisper, about a village that disappeared last year, just gone. Fields still full of crops, dogs still tied, every soul vanished, left behind only a stone idol buried in salt. He laughs when he finishes, a dry, cracked laugh. You don't laugh, because now you can hear something else in the woods. Not howling, not voices, breathing. Historians have since asked why the Romans didn't retreat then. Didn't pause, reinforce, regroup. Theories vary. Some say Varus was too proud. Others believe the logistical weight of 3 legions meant turning back was impossible. A minority theory, and a chilling one, suggests they couldn't retreat even if they wanted to, because the trap had already closed. The road ahead narrows again, but this time there's no turn, just a long slope between 2 ridges, the kind of place perfect for an ambush. Everyone knows it. And still, the horns sound. You march forward, because the machine hasn't broken. Yet. One strange detail, some of the local guides are missing, just not there anymore. Replaced quietly by others Arminius recommended. It's subtle, hardly noticed, but you remember their faces being different yesterday, and the new ones don't speak much. They don't need to. They're already exactly where they want to be. The trees groan as the wind shifts, and the rain begins again. A cold, needling rain that feels like it's not falling, but drifting sideways, sneaking into your cloak, into your thoughts. You tighten your grip on your shield, because you finally admit it to yourself. You're not marching into Germania. You're marching into a story someone else already wrote. And you're not the hero. You're the page they plan to tear out. Morning doesn't come, not properly, just a thinning of the dark, a shift from black to gray as if the sun decided to phone it in. You wake to wet socks, stiff fingers, and the sour knowledge that something is wrong with the air. It's too still. Birds aren't singing. No one is speaking. And ahead of you, nothing but trees. You march anyway, because Rome doesn't turn back, not even when it should. At first, the trail is manageable. Tight, yes, muddy, always, but manageable, until it narrows into something else, not a road, not a path, more like a suggestion carved between roots, the kind of route animals use, or ambushes. You glance up the hill to your left, nothing. To your right, a thicket, dense and too quiet. You feel watched. Again, and that's when the arrow hits the standard bearer in the throat. It's clean, silent, precise. He falls without a sound. No one reacts right away, not because they're slow, but because it's impossible. No war horn, no charge, just that thump, and then silence again. Then the second arrow. Then the third. Then the forest explodes. Screams rip from the trees, not human, not entirely. Horns, drums, whoops that seem to come from every direction at once. Spears fly, javelins slice the air, and before anyone can form a line, the first few ranks are already down. You raise your shield, but there's no formation to join, because Rome doesn't fight in chaos. And this is pure curated chaos. This is how the blood feuds and boar fat beat iron in order. The tribes aren't in armor, no polished bronze, no gleaming crests. They're smeared in grease and ash, half naked, faces painted, hair wild, blades curved for slashing in tight spaces. They scream like animals, but they strike like tacticians. You try to regroup with your unit. You can't find them. You trip over a body. You look down. It's someone you spoke to at dinner 2 nights ago. His face is gone. You keep moving, because if you stop, you'll die. Somewhere ahead, Varus is yelling. But the words mean nothing. His command structure is vapor. His flanks are gone. His rear guard is fighting ghosts. He orders the formation to tighten, as if you can tighten a broken bone. The legions were never meant to operate like this. Their strength is in cohesion. But here, you might as well be individual villagers with sticks. Only slower. And shinier. And very, very exposed. One of the weirder details that survives from the tribal records, or more accurately, Roman reports of them, is that some warriors wore bearskin cloaks soaked in fermented boar fat. The idea wasn't just intimidation, it was slip. Your blade would slide right off, it stank, it smoked, and it messed with your grip. Did it work? Enough to get written down. Enough to scare you now. Your gladius stakes in something. You pull. It won't come out. You leave it. And run. Someone grabs your arm. You spin. It's a young soldier, maybe 17. His face is bloodless, eyes wide. He stammers, "Where's the line? Where's the line?" You don't answer. Because there isn't one. Only trees. And screaming. And somewhere in the distance, drums. Always the drums. Historians still argue whether the tribes coordinated this perfectly or just capitalized on chaos. Some believe it was a masterstroke of Arminius's planning. Others think it was a wild melee that just happened to go brilliantly. The truth is probably in between. The terrain was picked, the timing was exact. The rest? That was instinct. In fury, you finally see Arminius. He's not in Roman armor anymore. He wears furs, feathers. His sword is curved, his face painted in lines like lightning. He walks through the carnage like a man at peace. You lock eyes for just a moment. He doesn't attack you. He doesn't even draw. He just nods, like he wants you to see it, to understand. Then he disappears into the trees. Somewhere in the madness, someone starts yelling for a fallback point. It's ignored. Others try to build a makeshift square. Too late. The cavalry, lost, the wagons, burning. And through it all, the forest offers no help. No landmarks, no sun, no direction. Just roots, in blood, in the steady collapse of everything you were trained to believe in. You stumble into a hollow where half a dozen Romans have taken cover. They're shaking. One has a broken arm and is trying to tie it off with a tunic. Another is praying, not to Jupiter, but to his mother. You don't speak, because what's left to say? Eventually, the fighting slows. Not stops, just slows. The tribes retreat, for now. They've made their point, and tomorrow, they'll come back. Because this wasn't a battle. It was a message. And that message is, you don't belong here. Somewhere in the trees, you hear laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, just confident. Like someone's finally playing a game they know they can win. You don't sleep. Not properly. You lie in what used to be a ditch, maybe a road, maybe a creek. It doesn't matter anymore. Your cloak is soaked, your teeth ache. Something in your ankle feels wrong. But worse than the pain is the silence. Because that means they're waiting. And if the forest is quiet, that means it's listening. Varus tries to regroup at dawn, or what passes for dawn. The sky is still gray, the rain still whispering, the fog thick as soup. You hear his voice somewhere behind a ridge, trying to sound in control. Trying, but his voice cracks. That's new. There's talk of moving out, of pushing through. We must rejoin the main line, someone says, as if there's a main line left to join. You glance around at what's left, blood-caked sandals, twisted armor, men without helmets, helmets without men. And the eyes. Everyone's eyes are different now. Sunken, not scared, beyond scared. They look like dogs after thunder, waiting for the next strike. You stand, because standing is all that's left. The order comes, move. No direction, no map, just move. So you do. And so begins the second day in the woods. This isn't marching anymore. This is fleeing in slow motion. You're no longer a unit. You're a line of survivors pretending to be soldiers. The shields hang wrong. The formations don't form. The rear guard disappears again. You hear a scream. And then, as if choreographed by nightmare, the sky opens. The forest wails. And the second ambush begins. You've entered what history remembers, or at least guesses, as the killing field of Teutoburg. But to you, it's just a place where the trees keep getting closer and the arrows keep getting louder. They don't come in waves. They come like teeth, biting, vanishing, biting again. No charge, no clash, just terror with tactics. Your shield shudders, another hit, you drop behind a stump. It's not cover, but it's something. Someone next to you screams that they saw Arminius again. You don't answer, you don't want to know. Because this no longer feels like war. It feels like punishment. You hear the cavalry trying to push through the flanks. You hear their horses fall. One of them gallops past you riderless. The saddle is soaked. You don't look closer. Another man tries to climb a hill to gain high ground. He slips, doesn't get back up. You fall into rhythm, duck, lunge, listen, run, not for glory, not for Rome, just for the next 10 minutes. You are now deep in the green trap, and the trees aren't neutral. Somewhere in the mess, you see Varus. Just a glimpse. His horse is limping. His face is smeared with something dark. Ash, maybe blood. He's yelling orders, but they don't travel. The fog eats them. Men nod, then ignore him. Not out of defiance, out of despair. There's a moment where his eyes meet yours. He looks broken, and old, and small. Then he's swallowed by the retreat. Historians still argue how Varus died. The official Roman version is a noble suicide, falling on his sword rather than be taken. Others suggest he was cut down trying to rally troops. A few darker accounts whisper that Arminius found him alive and left him there, bleeding, watching, waiting. One fringe tale says Varus's last words were, "Return my legions," but that line's more poetic than plausible. Because by now, there are no legions, just pieces. The rain keeps falling. You lose count of the bodies. Some are face down in streams. Some hang from trees, not executed, just thrown. You start to recognize the smell. It's copper and pine and rot, and it won't leave your nose again for the rest of your life. Night comes, but the attacks don't stop. Now it's close combat, blades in the dark, screams inches from your ear. You swing at shapes. One of them grunts, human, maybe Roman, maybe not. You crawl behind a wagon, it's tilted, a broken wheel. Someone lies underneath it. You don't check. You just close your eyes. Not to sleep, just to pretend. By the third day, the rain stops, but the dying doesn't. The survivors gather on a ridge, try to set up a last stand. They call it a redoubt. It's a ditch. You help dig, not because it'll help, just because moving your hands feels less useless than sitting. A few officers argue over next steps, retreat, advance, signal the Rhine. One even suggests sending a messenger. He's laughed at, not because it's funny, but because no one knows where to send one. You try to drink from your water skin. It's empty. You lick rain off your sleeve. In the distance, the horns sound again. Not yours. Theirs. They're not coming yet. Not this hour. They're just letting you know. They're still here. One soldier mutters a prayer to Apollo. Another starts pulling dice from a pouch and rolling them with shaking hands. Superstition creeps in like fog. Someone swears the trees are moving closer each night. Another says he saw the forest breathe. You don't argue, because honestly, you saw it too. And then, at last it comes. The final assault. A chorus of screams, fire, axes, the thunder of feet on wet wood. No battle line, just a crush. You swing, you slip, you stand, you fall. You grab a spear that isn't yours. You drive it into a shadow. The shadow screams. Another leaps at you. You fall back, into mud, into blood, into the end. And then, nothing. Not sleep. Not death. Just the nothing between. Where Rome breaks. You wake up face down in leaves, with the taste of iron in your mouth and the weight of silence pressing on your back like a tombstone. The forest doesn't sound like it did before. It's quieter, emptier. You lift your head, slowly, everything hurts. You're still alive, but you don't know why. Your armor is half gone, one boot is missing. Your gladius, wherever it is, isn't in your hand. Around you, the forest floor is littered with silence. Bodies, bits of armor, splintered shields. You sit up and realize you're surrounded, not by enemies, by what's left. You see the remains of the standard, not held, not planted, just dropped. The golden eagle on top is broken, its wings snapped, bent toward the ground like it's bowing to the forest. You crawl over to it, touch it, it's still warm. That makes you weep. Not loudly, not from grief, just from shock. Quiet tears, like your body is leaking because it doesn't know what else to do. This is what's left for the crows. A few other soldiers stagger through the underbrush, dirty, wild-eyed, red with blood that may not be theirs. No orders, no officers, no direction. They aren't even speaking. One of them has a wound on his side it's deep. You can see too much. He doesn't seem to notice. You try to stand. Your knees say no. So, you crawl. Like an animal. Like a thing that used to be human. Later, when chroniclers write about this moment, they'll call it one of Rome's worst defeats, the Clades Variana, the disaster of Varus. Over 15,000 men wiped out, 3 legions, auxiliary cohorts, officers, cavalry, all gone. Wiped off the imperial board like spilled ink. A few fringe historians claim even more were lost. Support staff, local scouts, slaves, they don't show up in the scrolls. They died just the same. The tribes don't come back immediately. They've taken what they need, weapons, armor, glory, and vengeance. The rest? They leave to rot. It's not mercy. It's statement. Sometime later, hours, days, you reach the edge of the trees. You don't remember how. There's a slope, a ridge, and then a plain. You see the river in the distance. You're not safe, but you're out. You fall to your knees and stare at the sky. It looks too blue. It feels offensive, as if the world has the audacity to go on shining. You are one of the few survivors of Teutoburg, and no one will believe what you've seen. Back near the heart of Germania, in a glade where the light turns golden through the leaves, the tribes hold their rites. Not celebration, not exactly. Something older, sacred. Some accounts describe altars, sacrifices, offerings to their gods of the forest and sky. Others mention prisoners executed in ritual fashion. One story, probably exaggerated but still chilling, says that captured officers were nailed to trees, alive. You don't want to know if it's true, but in your dreams it is. Roman historians would later debate whether the tribes were savage for doing this, whether they had no honor, whether they were animals. But from their point of view, this wasn't savagery. It was balance. Blood for blood. And it had been coming for a long time. When the first word reaches the Rhine, it's a whisper, then a rumor, then a scream. By the time the story hits Rome, it's already a legend. Germanicus, the golden boy, the crowd's favorite, hears the news while preparing for a Senate appearance. Aides rush to him. He listens, says nothing, just stares at the floor. Then, quietly, tells them to summon the engineers. "Build ships," he says, and the storm starts brewing. Augustus, the emperor, takes it worse. He doesn't eat. He doesn't sleep. According to one report, he bangs his head against the palace wall and cries, "Quintili ver, legiones reda." "Varus, give me back my legions." But they won't come back. Not ever. Back in Germania, the vultures circle, literally. Bones bleach under soft sun. Armor rusts. Wind whines through empty helmets. It's said that some ghosts never left that place. Years later, Roman patrols would still find remnants. Bones scattered like dice across the ground. Pieces of Roman standards tangled in roots. Skulls used as drinking vessels. Helmets turned into wind chimes. It's not poetry. It's what happens when empire collides with people who won't be absorbed. You spend weeks convalescing in a makeshift camp along the Rhine. There are maybe a few hundred survivors, scattered and stunned. Some don't speak anymore. Others speak too much, trying to make sense of something senseless. You catch yourself as saying the same line to anyone who will listen. "We were just marching." It's not a lie. It's just the last part you remember clearly. Later, a young centurion comes through camp, tall, clean, still smells like olive oil. He asks you what it was like. You don't answer him. You just stare. Because how do you explain the forest? How do you explain the breathing trees, the vanishing trails, the face of Arminius staring at you through war paint and pity? You can't. So you nod, and go back to sharpening your sword. Even though there's no one left to fight. The Rhine feels like a wall now, not just a river, but a line between two worlds, one civilized, one wild, one marble and scrolls and speeches. the other dripping with moss, soaked in blood, and full of names Rome refuses to learn. You stand at the edge and stare across the water. Behind you, Rome is licking its wounds. Ahead of you, the woods are silent. You know they're not empty. They're just waiting. Word of Teutoburg spreads like fire on dry papyrus, whispers in bathhouses, gasps in the Senate. Even in the markets, you hear the same phrase again and again. 3 legions gone. Not beaten, not routed. Gone. Swallowed by trees. You're reassigned to a garrison near Colonia Agrippina. Not exactly punishment, but not promotion either. No one wants to talk to you much. You're a ghost now. One of them, the ones who came back different. Your new commander asks if it was really that bad. You just say, worse. Then you stop talking. Because every time you close your eyes, you still hear the drums. Back in Rome, Emperor Augustus stares at maps that now feel more like fiction. He orders fortifications, defensive measures, a full-scale halt to expansion beyond the Rhine. It's the first time in a long time that Rome looks at a frontier and blinks. The historians call it a recalibration, but you call it what it is. Fear. Still, Rome doesn't forget how to be angry. And soon, the empire begins to plan revenge. Germanicus is placed in charge of a new campaign. His orders are clear: punish the tribes, reclaim the eagles, restore honor. He gathers legions, engineers, ships, a vast supply chain. But what he really gathers is rage. You, somehow, are chosen to ride with them. Maybe because you're one of the few who's been there. Maybe because you don't flinch anymore. Maybe because you stopped asking questions. Either way, you find yourself back in armor, standing on a riverbank once again, watching barges fill with soldiers who don't know what waits in the trees. And you don't tell them, because no one would believe it. You sail north, then march east. It's different now. Larger forces, better scouts, more caution. But still, as you step into the forest again, you feel it. The shift in the air, the tightening of breath, the sense that the trees remember you, and that they're wondering if you've learned anything. At first it goes well. Small villages burn. Raiding parties are crushed. Roman flags are planted where wood once ruled. Germanicus gives speeches, the men cheer. But you're watching the sides of the trail. Always. And then you reach the place. You don't need a map. Your body knows it before your eyes do. The bend in the trail, the slope, the narrow gap, the twisted trees still marked by blood that's long dried into bark. This is where it happened. This is where you broke. The engineers set up a perimeter, a patrol combs the area, and you kneel. Not from reverence, from recognition, from memory. What happens next will be written in dusty Latin by old men in quiet libraries. They'll say Germanicus recovered the eagles, 2 out of 3. They'll say he struck fear into the tribes, that he slaughtered thousands, that he nearly brought Germania to its knees. And parts of that are true. But parts aren't. Because the deeper you go, the more things start to go sideways. Storms strike suddenly. Paths vanish overnight. Carts sink into mud that wasn't there the day before. One officer swears a full unit walked into the forest and never came back. The scouts are less sure where they are every day. The ghosts have started to whisper again. And Arminius? He's not hiding. He's waiting. You hear stories from prisoners. Arminius has united more tribes. He's a hero now, not just a warrior, but a symbol. He speaks of freedom, of land, of blood. He invokes gods older than Jupiter, names that curl in your ear like smoke. You hear Donar and Tiwaz in the spirits of the grove. You don't ask for translations. You don't want them. Historians still argue whether Germanicus could have won, truly won, whether a full conquest of Germania was ever possible, whether the terrain, the tribes, the sheer chaos of the forest made permanent occupation a fantasy. A few radical voices say Rome should have made peace earlier. Others claim Germanicus was pulled back just as victory was in reach, a victim of politics more than war. You just remember the screaming. and the way the trees seem to move. Eventually, Germanicus is recalled. He sails back to Rome, where he's given a triumph, a massive celebration with parades, gold, incense, and cheering crowds. People chant his name, throw roses. You stand in the crowd, in uniform, and silent, because you know what didn't come home. The forest didn't come home. The dead didn't come home. And part of you, you left it there, beneath those trees, where the eagles fell. You return to garrison life, but it doesn't feel like life. The days blur, drills, repairs, reports, the usual machinery of the empire clanking forward like nothing happened, but you know something did, something too large for scrolls, too wild for Senate records, too quiet for temples. You drink more now. Not heavily, just enough to blur the edges. And when people ask about the forest, you say the same two words every time. It moved. Others don't believe you. They laugh, roll their eyes, offer a shrug or a jest. One soldier tries to get a rise out of you by carving a tree face into a training post. You punch him without thinking. It feels good. Until it doesn't. You notice something else too. The German tribes aren't gloating. No chants, no messengers bragging across the Rhine. No prisoners marched in with painted shields and stolen armor. Just silence. Cold and uncelebratory. And that tells you something far more terrifying. They don't think they won. They think they balanced the scale. And they're waiting to see if you try to tip it again. Rome, meanwhile, spins. Germanicus' triumph is still the talk of the empire. The Senate swells with pride. Coins are minted. New murals show barbarians in chains, which ironically isn't accurate because most of them aren't in chains and still live comfortably beyond the river. But it doesn't matter. Rome needs stories more than truth. Your commander receives new orders. The limes, Rome's fortified frontier, is to be reinforced, watchtowers rebuilt, more legions posted along the river. They say it's for peace. You know it's for fear. Because Rome doesn't want another Teutoburg, even if no one says it out loud. One of your new recruits asks about the lost legions. Do you think they could have made it out? You want to laugh. You don't. You just say, some did. He asks what they saw. You say, not enough. He doesn't understand. He will. And here's the strangest thing. Trade resumes. Not immediately and not confidently, but it does. German merchants begin reappearing along the fringes. Furs, amber, salted fish, Roman tools, and wine go back the other way. No handshakes, no warmth, just a silent acknowledgement. The forest burned, but the world didn't end. Some call it pragmatism. Others call it denial. You just call it confusing. One trader, old, gray, eyes like granite, says something in a dialect you barely remember. It takes you a moment to translate. Roughly, you send swords. We send silence. He leaves behind a crate of pelts and vanishes before dusk. Scholars still argue what that quiet trade meant. Was it appeasement, submission, mutual understanding? Some suggest it was simply business, and that economics will always outlast ideology. Others point to the odd rhythms of frontier diplomacy, where enemies can swap arrows in one season and pottery in the next. You wonder if it was something deeper. Not peace, just pause. You dream more now. Of the forest. Of boots stuck in mud. Of eagles weeping. You wake with leaves in your fist, even when you went to sleep inside. Somewhere in the east, Arminius is still alive. You know this from whispers, intelligence reports, letters passed between grim-faced officers. He's no longer just a warrior. He's a myth, a king without a crown, a warlord who declined to become emperor of anything, preferring to keep the tribes loosely allied, wild, volatile, and free. Rome calls that weakness, but you know it's strength, because unity can be bought. But freedom? That's chosen. You patrol the border sometimes, not far, just enough to remind the other side you're watching. You never cross the river, not anymore. Not after that. But once, just once, you see movement on the far bank. A figure in furs. He doesn't wave. He just watches, then turns and melts into the trees. A few years later, news spreads. Arminius is dead, not by Roman hand, but by his own kin. A betrayal, politics, power. Some say it was envy, others say fear, that he was becoming too Roman, too centralized. The tribes respected him, but they didn't want a king. You don't celebrate. You just whisper, of course, because you know the forest doesn't suffer crowns, only roots. Rome breathes easier after that, builds higher, drills harder, pretends the scar is healed. But the veterans, the ones who survived, they know better. They nod at each other in the street, quiet acknowledgments that don't need words. Because they remember the mud, the masks, the moment the empire's breath caught in its throat. The years slide by like mud on worn sandals. You're older now, not ancient, but aged in the way that only forest warfare can age a man. The kind of age that lives in the joints, behind the eyes, under the fingernails. You still serve, technically, but mostly you observe, quiet, dependable, hard to startle. They call you the ghost of Teutoburg. You don't correct them. This is the chapter where Germanicus returns with fire. And for a little while, it feels like revenge might actually work. He comes back to the Rhine with more legions than ever, 20,000 men, veterans, fresh recruits, engineers, and, of course, poets to write about it afterward. He doesn't come to negotiate, he comes with flame. You watch his arrival from a tower. He dismounts like a man with a mission. And he is on a mission. It's not personal, or so he says. It's about order, about reclaiming honor, about showing the Germanic tribes that Rome doesn't forget its debts. His father had been poisoned, his uncle lost legions, his people demand closure. And closure, apparently, wears armor. You join the expedition, not by assignment, but request. Germanicus wants survivors. Not because he cares, because he wants accuracy. You're a map now, a living compass of what not to do. They treat you with caution, maybe even respect. You don't speak unless you have to, but when you do, they listen. Especially when you say, not that path. At first, everything goes well. Villages burn, cattle are seized, forts are built, and Roman morale soars. You can feel it in the campfires, the way soldiers laugh again, the way officers strut. They want this to be a rerun with a different ending. They want to carve their vengeance into the woods. But you've been here before. You know the pattern, and it always starts with overconfidence. One strange moment, you find a carved totem nailed to a tree. Half rotted with age, it's one of the old ones, a face made from horn and bark, painted in a spiral pattern. Beneath it is a Roman gladius, driven into the roots. Germanicus's aide asks if it's a threat. You say, no. Then, after a pause, it's a reminder. A few weeks into the campaign, the legions find bones. Old ones. Dozens, hundreds. Some bleached white, some still armored. They're scattered across what had once been the battlefield, if you can even call it that. Helmets crushed like eggshells, javelins snapped like twigs. And there, lying askew near a ditch, a Roman eagle. One of the lost three. You approach it in silence. It feels wrong to cheer. The men want to, some do, but the veterans, you included, just stand there. Because you know what this place is. It's not a battlefield. It's a grave. Germanicus orders it retrieved, wrapped, cleaned, and sent back with ceremony. That night he holds a feast, boars roast, wine flows, he makes a speech. About resilience, about empire, about Rome never truly falling. But you're not at the feast. You're sitting near the tree line, sharpening your knife. Not because you expect to use it, just because your hands won't stop shaking. The next day, the weather changes. It starts with a fog, heavier than usual. Then comes the rain, then wind, then rivers flooding their banks. Wagons sink, horses panic, men shout, scouts disappear. And then, lightning. Real lightning. the kind that splits trees in half and lights the sky with the fury of forgotten gods. You try not to smile, but part of you wonders, is this a counterattack? Historians still debate whether this was coincidence or curse. Some say it was just bad timing, the natural chaos of the Germanic wilds. Others point to omens, to storm gods, to wrath not yet spent. One fringe theory suggests the tribes had learned to manipulate terrain, flooding routes, setting traps, harnessing the wild like a weapon. You think it doesn't matter, because the forest always wins when you overstay your welcome. Germanicus pushes forward anyway. He has to. The Senate is watching, Rome is watching, and maybe deep down he believes he can bend this place into submission, if not with swords, then with spectacle. But every step feels heavier. The ground is turning against you again. You hear whispers in the trees, old names. Arminius is still gone, but his story isn't. You finally speak again, just once, to the commander of your cohort. He asks what you think of the campaign. You say, it's not the same forest. He frowns. What do you mean? You just stare into the trees. Because how do you explain that you've spent more time afraid of roots than spears? They find the second eagle weeks later. Same scene. Same silence. This time, no feast. Just a nod from Germanicus. And a longer than necessary pause as he looks into the trees. Soon after, the campaign ends. Not with defeat. Not with disaster. Just exhaustion. The legions are pulled back. Rome declares moral victory. Coins are minted. Paintings are painted. Scrolls are signed and sealed and archived in the great libraries. Everyone smiles. And no one returns to Germania for a long time. You retire soon after. They offer you a pension. You take it. But you never go home. Instead, you settle near the Rhine, not quite Roman, not quite forest, somewhere in between, because that's where your soul lives now. Half in empire, half in woods, and always listening for drums. The years blur like candle smoke. You don't remember the exact day they stopped calling it revenge and started calling it memory. Maybe it was after the second eagle was retrieved. Maybe it was when Germanicus was recalled. Or maybe it was just when the cheering died down. Now, all that's left is the echo. And the ghost of the lost legions. You walk often. Along the edge of the forest. Not in it, not anymore. But near enough to feel the breath of the trees. Sometimes the wind shifts and you swear you hear armor clinking. A horn in the distance. A name you haven't spoken in years. You never chase the sound. Because you know where it leads. And what waits there. Rome keeps growing, of course. Walls rise higher, cities buzz louder, roads stretch longer. But something changed after Teutoburg. Not just geopolitically, spiritually, a quiet shift, a hesitation. Rome doesn't say it out loud, but it walks differently now. Like it knows the ground can open. One day, a diplomat arrives at your outpost. A senator's son, soft hands, soft eyes, eager to gather stories. He says he's writing a history of the legions, wants first-hand accounts. You offer him wine. You listen to his questions, and then you take him for a walk. You don't go far, just a ridge above the river. You stop where the pines grow thinner, where the moss covers stones that were once road. You tell him, this was a column. He frowns. There? You nod. There. He asked if the stories are true. About the dismemberment. The sacrifice. The men nailed to trees. You don't answer. Because the truth is too soft for ink. And too sharp for a young man with dry hands. He asks if the legions ever stood a chance. You say, they were brave. He asks again. You repeat it. Because some things are better left unsaid. Historians still search for relics. Every few years, someone finds a shard of armor, a rusted gladius, a half-buried coin. They send it back to Rome, clean it, display it under glass. A caption reads, Teutoburg artifact circa 9 AD. You once saw one of those exhibits. Stood in front of a bent helmet for 10 minutes. People passed by sipping wine, reading placards. No one noticed your hand shaking. The battlefield itself, or what scholars think was the battlefield, has been excavated in pieces. One theory places it near Calcrease, a narrow path hemmed in by hill and marsh. Makes sense. Arminius would have picked a place like that. A trap disguised as a trail. Just like he always did. But even the soil feels reluctant to speak. The finds are scattered, reluctant. The bones are many, but the answers are few. One archaeologist famously said, "This forest gives up secrets like teeth, one at a time and only if pulled." You like that line. You think of it often. You've begun to forget names. Not the people, just the versions of them before the forest. You remember Septimus, but not what he laughed like. You remember Cassia, but not the tune she always hummed while cleaning armor. You remember your centurion, but not the exact words he screamed when it all fell apart. Time dulls the edges, but the pain, that lingers. Software patient, unfinished. One day, a trader from the east tells you something strange. He says there's a village in the forest, deep, far from Roman eyes, where a shrine still stands, not to German gods, not to tribal spirits, to a Roman soldier. They say he died defending children. They say he killed 10 warriors before falling. They say he screamed something no one could translate. You smile, not because you believe it, but because it means someone remembered. You don't wear your armor anymore, but you keep it polished, not for use, just for witness. Every dent tells a story. Every scuff is a prayer you didn't realize you said. At night, you sit by the fire and listen. Sometimes the wind sounds like marching. Sometimes the shadows move wrong. Sometimes you wake up thinking you're back there, in the mist, in the mud, in the green trap that never stops breathing. But then the fire crackles, and you remember. You lived, and that's more than most. A child asks you once why you survived. You say, "I kept moving." She asks what you ran from. You say, "Everything." Then you add softer, and towards something too. Because even in that forest, in that chaos, there was still a thread, a moment, a heartbeat of clarity. You saw what Rome couldn't, not weakness, not savagery, just people defending what was theirs. And when you understood that, you stopped fighting and started surviving. You've become a kind of monument, not made of stone, not standing on a plinth, but in the way that people treat you, with quiet curiosity, like they're approaching something old, not just in age, but in weight. Young soldiers offer you wine, old ones offer silence, and the officers, they mostly just nod, because you've seen what the swamp swallows, and lived. Your post is near the Lipa now, where the land flattens into long green sighs, and the air carries more mist than breeze. It's prettier here, gentler, but don't be fooled. You know what waits just below the surface. And one morning, when the fog curls around your ankles and the boots squish a little too deep into the soil, it all comes back. That day, you were part of an advance unit. Germanicus had ordered a push deeper into tribal territory, a sweeping maneuver meant to corner rebel bands retreating into marshlands. On parchment, it looked brilliant. On boots, it was muck. You remember the moment the ground changed, not in appearance, in resistance. One step, solid. Next step, ankle deep, then knee deep. Then you're not walking anymore. You're dragging. The swamp doesn't kill with weapons. It kills with patience. Armor weighs more, shields drag, horses falter, formations dissolve without fanfare, no ambush, no arrows, just sinking. Your unit tried to double back, but by then the path was gone, swallowed like breadcrumbs in rain. One of your comrades, you think his name was Titus, panicked, started screaming, said the ground was moving, that the swamp was breathing. You tried to calm him, but then he vanished. Just gone. No splash, no scream, just sucked under like a coin into a river god's hand. Historians still argue whether this swamp was a natural hazard or a deliberate defense. Some think the tribes rerouted streams, dammed rivers, flooded paths. One fringe theory claims they created false trails, inviting solid-looking banks that crumbled at the third or fourth footstep. You believe it. You were there. You saw the plants tied with thread, not vines. You saw stakes driven beneath the muck, meant to trap wagons. That's not weather. That's war. Germanicus, to his credit, tried to adapt. He ordered lighter armor, shorter marches, amphibious scouting parties. But you could tell it rattled him, not the losses, the invisibility of it. Fighting men you can see. You can name. But how do you fight a swamp? A trail? A place? One afternoon, you found a Roman helmet half submerged in mud, still gleaming. You pulled it free. Inside was a frog. It blinked at you, then hopped away, and you stood there, suddenly unsure if you were the soldier, or just another thing the swamp hadn't digested yet. They sent engineers to build a causeway, planks over the marsh. Good idea, but someone forgot to guard the rear. That night, the tribe set it on fire. You watched flames crawl like serpents across the wet wood, hissing, glowing, dying slow. It smelled like rot and pride. Your orders the next day: hold position. But the position no longer existed. The river had changed course. Overnight. That's what the forest does. It rearranges itself when no one's looking. Eventually, the campaign pulled back. Not because of a battle. Because of saturation. Men were sick. Boiled feet, swollen legs, coughs that sounded like drowning. One soldier swore he saw faces in the reeds, not warriors. Dead friends. You didn't laugh, because you did too. Later, they'd say it was a tactical retreat. But you remember the word that passed through the camp like a chill? Cursed. You made it back, again. Fewer did this time. Some didn't drown. They just sat down. Let the swamp take them. One lieutenant smiled as it rose to his chest. Didn't scream. Just smiled. Like maybe he was finally done running. That's the thing no one understands. You don't need blades to break a legion. You just need doubt, and the earth beneath their feet to vanish. Rome kept trying to write the swamp out of the story. They focused on battles, heroes, standards. But in the quiet corners, among old veterans like you, people whispered the truth. The swamp fought smarter than any general, because it never slept, never negotiated, and never lost twice the same way. One time, years later, a merchant tried to drain part of the marsh for a villa. He built dikes, dug channels, cleared land. 3 weeks in, he found a skull. Human, Roman, still wearing a rank insignia. The merchant moved to Gaul, left the land untouched. The locals say nothing's grown there since. You sit now, watching reeds bend in the breeze. You sip weak wine, chew dried apples, sharpen a knife you don't plan to use. And you remember that forest isn't always made of trees. Sometimes it's made of water and time, and silence thick enough to drown in. Years have a strange way of softening edges, but not these edges. Not the jagged ones left by bogs and blades and betrayal. You can polish a sword until it shines, but it will still remember every rib it ever cracked. And deep in the bones of the Rhine frontier, Rome finally accepts a bitter truth. Germania is too wild to conquer, but too close to ignore. They start building walls. Not city walls, empire walls. Long ones, stone and timber stretching like scars across the landscape, meant not just to keep invaders out, but to keep ambition in. It's called the limes. And no, not the fruit. Limes, plural of limen, the Latin word for threshold, border, edge. Rome is drawing a line. Not because it wants to, because it has to. You're assigned to one of the new outposts, square, precise, boring, built by engineers who measure everything twice and trust timber more than fate. The wall's not finished yet, so your days are filled with hammer strikes, mule brays, and the endless sound of men pretending they aren't afraid. You're not afraid either, but not because you're brave, because you already died in those woods once. This is just the epilogue. The tribes still appear sometimes. Not in full force, not like Teutoburg. No, these days it's raids. Quiet ones. Fast. A cart goes missing, a patrol vanishes, a pile of horse bones found in the morning, arranged in a circle. Warnings. Reminders. They don't want Rome back across the river. They just want Rome to remember. One soldier, young, overly fond of wine, scoffs at the idea that the tribes could ever be a threat again. "We've got walls now," he says, spitting olive pits into the dirt. "They've got goats." You say nothing, because goats are less important than grudges. And the Germanic tribes, they never forget. The wall becomes its own little world. Inside, order. Outside, shadows. Inside, Latin. Outside, whispers. Rome starts exporting its culture like wine, villas, temples, bureaucrats. But even so, the border feels less like a curtain and more like a dam. Pressure building on one side, time ticking, everyone pretending they don't hear the wood start to creak. And here's the strange part. Trade flourishes. Wait, wasn't this supposed to be the site of blood and vengeance? Yes, but also fur, amber, salted meat. The tribes bring their goods to the limes, exchange them for Roman steel and southern wine. They come with carts, not swords. At least, for now. Some think it means peace. You don't. You think it means adaptation? Because Rome sees commerce as conquest. But the tribes, they see it as armor. The more they learn, the less they need to fight. The more they sell, the more they understand how to buy you. Not with coins, with cleverness. Historians call this era the calm before the storm. But to you, it was more like the eye of one. You're stationed at Fort Vetera when a traveler arrives. Not Roman, not tribal, but something in between. Wears a mixture of fabrics, carries no weapon, claims to be a cultural messenger. You've seen his kind before. Raised by both worlds, speaks Latin too well, smiles too much. He shares news. The Marcomanni are gathering. The Chatti are restless. There's talk of unity, not peace, not war. Just movement. When he leaves behind a pouch of polished stones. Decorative? Maybe. But you recognize one. It's a weight from a Roman scale. Worn smooth. Carried far. It means something. You go for a walk. Down along the riverbank. You watch the sun sink behind the wall. Your wall, the one you helped raise. And for the first time in years, you ask yourself, what's on the other side of this line? Not just tribes, not just trees, but stories. Ones you were never taught, ones you helped bury. One night, a fire is seen just past the tree line. Too organized to be an accident, too small to be an invasion. But it burns for hours, and when it goes out, nothing is found. No footprints, no ashes, just a stone, warm, placed on the wall. It has a symbol scratched into it. A bird with no wings. Rome's message is clear, stay out. But theirs is quieter. We're still here. The wall works, for now. But even the best walls don't stop wind. And the wind carries names. Suebi, Franks, Goths. Names that grow heavier with every year. Not because they're marching, because they're watching and waiting. You keep a knife by your bed, still sharp, still used, not for war, for memory. You shave it against the stone like you're sharpening the past. Because no matter how tall you build a wall, you still dream of trees. They called them kings sometimes, but that word never really fit. Because in Germania, there were no thrones, no marble courts, no royal decrees carried on velvet, only longhouses filled with smoke and suspicion, where men with scars argued over firelight and revenge. These weren't monarchs. They were wolves in cloaks. And they didn't wear crowns. They wore grudges. You hear the name Maroboduus whispered across the river. A big name, a man who once served in Rome, trained in the city, spoke Latin better than some of the officers who now scoff at his rebellion. Sound familiar? Yeah, you've seen that story before. Different wolf, same borrowed toga. He's trying to build something, a confederation, a kind of proto-kingdom among the Marcomanni far southeast. Not your region, not your problem, but you feel the tremor in it. Because when little kings start thinking big, things break. First swords, then borders. Word travels fast in frontier stations. One day, a merchant shows up at your post with a scroll. Half trade manifest, half gossip pamphlet. It says the tribes are arguing again, Maroboduus versus Arminius, or at least what's left of his legacy. Different tribes, same blood feud. Historians still argue about this clash. Some say it was Rome's dream, barbarians fighting barbarians. Others say it was Rome's fault. Rome taught them to organize, after all. But you know the truth. It was inevitable, because unity was not their nature. And yet, the pressure to survive, the pressure Rome created, meant that even wolves tried to form packs. And packs, they don't always get along. You're transferred again, north this time, deeper into the frontier, a more diplomatic post, whatever that means. You share a barracks wall with traders, scouts, and an old scribbler from Gaul who insists on chronicling native customs. He keeps asking you about war paint. You keep telling him to shut up. But the tribes are changing. You can feel it. They meet more, gather more. They hold councils instead of ambushes. Not always, but often enough to raise eyebrows. You sit at a watchtower one afternoon, looking over the hills. You imagine what it would take to unite them. A myth? A god? A second Arminius? Or something worse. One night, a delegation arrives. Tribal elders wrapped in fur, speaking through interpreters. They don't bow, they don't threaten, they just observe. And then they laugh. Not mockingly, not rudely. Like they see something you don't. Later, you find a clay carving they left behind. A Roman eagle. Bent, missing a wing. Carved in tiny, almost reverent detail. You bring it to your commander. He says it's insulting. You say it's a warning. He doesn't listen. You can feel it building now. The low drum of unification. Not full alliance, not yet. But talks, deals, marriages, raids with rules, enemies with handshakes. It's messy, unstable, human, and it terrifies Rome. Because chaos, Rome can fight. It's order it fears, order it didn't create. More scouts vanish in the woods. The patrols grow tense. Every creak feels like a message. Every bird call sounds wrong. And the names get louder. Chatti, Marcomanni, Suebi, Quadi, Bructeri. And always that whisper. What if they stop fighting each other? A commander writes a letter to the Senate. He urges preemptive strikes. He says the tribes are consolidating. He uses words like unified threat and barbarian federation. You hear the scrolls crinkle with fear. But Rome hesitates, because by now it knows. Marching east is not a tactic. It's a wager. You remember something Arminius said, years ago, before the ambush, before everything burned. He looked at the river and said, "Adi, you Romans want us to be like you, but we'd rather die as ourselves." At the time, you thought it was bravado. Now you think it was prophecy. You still sharpen your blade, still walk the line, still nod at passing officers who pretend you're just another relic. But in your dreams, the wolves are talking, not howling, talking. And when they do, that's when the world shifts. It starts to feel like peace. Not the kind written in marble or promised by treaties, but the slow, weird kind. A peace that creeps in through routine, that disguises itself as boredom. The kind that makes young officers think the frontier has finally settled. But you know better. Because this is a peace that isn't peace. Trade is thriving, again. You see it every morning. Wagons rolling through the gates, filled with amber, furs, and stories no one believes. The tribes bring goods wrapped in bark, carried by silent-eyed boys and thick-armed men who don't flinch at Roman inspection. They don't speak Latin except for the words that matter. Price, iron, salt. The market feels strange. A Roman blacksmith chats with a Suebi hunter over spearheads. A Roman woman trades perfume for pelts and asks about northern dyes. You hear laughter and mixed accents. It almost feels normal. And that makes it worse. One day, a boy sells you a wooden carving, a little Roman soldier, crude but careful. Shield, helmet, even a facial scar. You ask where he learned to make it. He shrugs. My father saw them once. You ask if he was a soldier. The boy says, he says they burned. You don't ask more. You just take the carving and sit with it for a long time. The commanders call this an era of controlled harmony, a nice phrase for something fragile. The forts are manned. The taxes are collected. The scouts report quiet crossings. But even so, you feel it in the air, like the scent before a thunderstorm or the stillness before an avalanche. Because some things don't disappear. They hibernate. One morning, a fight breaks out in the outer market. A Roman trader accuses a tribal merchant of shorting him on grain. The tribal man laughs, not apologetically, but defiantly. A crowd forms. Words become shouts. Shouts become fists. And suddenly, the whole place is cracked open like a rotten nut. You're one of the first to the scene. You don't draw your weapon. Not yet. You step between them, shouting in broken tribal dialect, calming the Roman with nothing more than eye contact and presence. It works. Barely. But as you walk away, you hear a voice behind you, quiet and cold. This is only quiet because we let it be. You don't turn around. You just keep walking. Later that week, a patrol finds a boundary marker defaced. Not destroyed. Just redrawn. The tribal symbol carved over the Roman one. A deliberate overlap. A message. Historians still puzzle over this period. Some say the tribes were appeased. Some say they were just buying time. One theory suggests they were testing Rome, pushing softly at the edges, watching for reactions. Another claims they'd begun to see Rome not as enemy, but tool. Something to use, learn from, eventually replace. You think maybe they were just waiting for Rome to fall on its own. Because inside the empire, things aren't clean. Politics twist like vines. Emperors rise and fall faster than statues can be carved. Civil wars. Backstabbing. Panic hidden behind golden speeches. The rot is internal now, not swords, but senators. And the tribes? They watch. You see them sometimes, standing still on the far bank, just looking. Not hostile. Not afraid. Just measuring. And you get the sinking feeling that they're waiting for the wall to crack from the inside. Not from pressure. From neglect. You get word that another Roman outpost burned down farther east. No invasion, no battle. Just fire. And gone. A few survivors say it was locals. Rome says it was unrest. You say nothing, because you've seen how peace can be a blanket thrown over a sword. One day, you meet an old tribal woman in the outer camp. She's selling roots and herbs, the kind the Romans don't know what to do with. You buy a bundle out of curiosity. She studies you. You're not afraid, she says. You shrug. She leans closer. But you should be. Then she smiles. Not cruelly, but like someone watching a storm roll in from the horizon, and knowing she won't need to run. You lie awake more now. Not from fear. From awareness. You hear noises others miss, the way the wind has changed direction, the way dogs bark too long at the gates, the way the torches seem to flicker all at once, the way your dreams start with drums again. This isn't peace. It's a pause. A collective breath. And you don't know who will exhale first. But when they do, the forest will remember, and the fire will not need permission to return. They say the forest is Roman now. They say it with straight faces in marble halls, while holding maps drawn by men who've never seen the inside of a pine grove. They point to grain records, to trade routes, to names scratched into boundary stones. But you walk the edge every day. And you know what they don't. The forest is learning Latin. It starts subtly. Children with Roman names, mixed tunics and tribal cloaks. A chief's son who signs his name with a Roman letter. At first it feels like victory, proof that civilization is winning, that the chaos has been tamed. But civilization doesn't just export. It bleeds. The tribes begin to speak Latin in the markets. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to argue, enough to cheat, enough to negotiate a better deal on a barrel of southern oil. You see a Bructeri merchant quote Virgil, badly, and get a discount for the effort. Rome laughs, but the laugh is hollow, because every sentence they learn is a door, and every door opens both ways. One day, a tribal girl arrives at your post. She speaks flawless Latin, calls herself Julia, says she's come to study. She writes fast, asks smart questions, takes notes on everything, military ranks, Roman law, funeral rites. An officer calls her a promising example of assimilation. You call her a mirror, because what she's learning is you. Historians would later call this cultural bleed, a period where borders were enforced with spears, but the minds of men began to drift, when the forest stopped resisting Rome's shape and started wearing it. But not as surrender, as camouflage. You see it in fashion, in rituals, in funerals that now include coins for Karen, slipped into mouths that once only chanted to oak spirits. Even the gods begin to blend. Tiwaz becomes Mars of the forest. Donar becomes Hercules with antlers. And temples start looking suspiciously like shrines. There's a village not far from your post, technically loyal, technically civilized. You visit once on orders. You're greeted in Latin, given wine, served by boys wearing Roman belts over tribal tunics. There's a statue in the square. It's a Roman eagle, made of wood, with antlers. You ask the elder what it represents. He smiles and says, "We remember." Then he hands you a cup of wine and changes the subject. One night, the camp receives a visitor, a bard, tribal but fluent. He performs for the soldiers, a song about a Roman who marries a forest spirit and forgets his name. Everyone laughs, except you, because you've heard that melody before, but not in Latin. You begin to notice how fast they're adapting, quicker than the Gauls, quicker than the Britons, quicker than anyone expected. And the worst part? They're getting better at being Roman than the Romans are. There's a young chatty man who wins a wrestling contest at the Saturnalia Games. He quotes Cicero, wears a laurel crown, and thanks the gods in Latin and Old High German. The governor beams, says this is what the empire is about. You just watch the young man's eyes. They're not proud. They're calculating. Rome's greatest weapon was never the sword. It was identity. But when you give people your language, your gods, your customs, you assume they'll use them the way you do. You forget they can also turn them into weapons. There's a word in Latin, subsidium. It means reserve. Relief? Something held back, just in case. And that's what this feels like now. Like the tribes are a subsidium of vengeance, learning your ways, not to join you, but to replace you. One day, you meet a boy writing on a wax tablet. He's sketching maps of both sides of the Rhine. He looks up and asks if you think Rome will ever truly understand the forest. You say, no. He says that that's what we're counting on. Historians still debate whether this was true assimilation or strategic mimicry. Some argue the tribes were becoming Romanized. Others claim they were rehearsing, preparing for a world after Rome. A world with roads and baths and laws, but not emperors. Just memory. And maybe a crown made of bark. You walk the wall one night, hear drums in the distance, faint, rhythmic, familiar, but just a little too slow, like someone is learning to play a Roman cadence, with forest hands, The stones begin to crack. Not all at once, not with trumpets and banners and screaming torches. No, Rome doesn't break like that. It breaks the way statues do, from inside. A hairline fracture no one notices, until the whole thing tips. You feel it in the air, like a skipped beat in the imperial heart. Cracks in the marble. The limes still stand. The walls are still manned. The scouts still report minor incursions and routine disturbances. But, because the men standing watch with you are different now. You see it in their eyes, not alert, not sharp. Dulled, tired, spoiled on a century of assumed supremacy. And in the cities, even worse. Corruption gnaws through the Senate like termites in a library. Factions fight with ink and poison while statues outside crumble from acid rain and apathy. Emperors rise and fall like dice off a tavern table. Most are forgotten before their busts are even finished. Your pay comes late now. Sometimes not at all. Supplies thin. Messages arrive incomplete or don't arrive at all. And in the silence, the frontier begins to feel less like a boundary, and more like a last stand. One morning, you inspect the western wall and find something strange. A symbol, burned into the wood. Not Roman, but not quite tribal either. You stare at it for a long time. It looks like two hands pulling opposite directions. A message? A threat? A mirror? You show it to your commander. He shrugs, says it's nothing, but that night he drinks more than usual. And the next day, he sends a double patrol east. More and more, you hear about strange movements beyond the river. A caravan found empty. A farm burned. A small garrison gone, not slaughtered, just missing. No signs of struggle, just absence. You get letters, rare, wrinkled things carried by frozen couriers with hollow eyes. News from across the empire. Africa rising. Gaul stirring. Even Britannia, long subdued, seems unsettled. One letter ends with the words, "Rome is tired." You keep it, not because it's poetic, because it's true. There's a new emperor now, again. You don't bother learning his name, because you've stopped fighting for Rome. Now, you fight for the line, the space between the torch and the tree. And still, across the border, the tribes grow bolder. Not reckless, confident. They no longer sneak, they scout. They don't ask, they negotiate. Their leaders now wear rings, sign documents, command with quiet eyes. You once saw a young chieftain riding a horse like a senator, dressed in layered furs and a Roman military cloak. When asked where he got it, he smiled and said, "My father's." He didn't mean from Rome. He meant from Rome's bones. You begin to wonder if they've always been patient. If the last 100 years weren't submission, but observation. Learning how you move, how you think, how you crumble. You speak to a merchant's guard, tribal, well-paid, polite. He asks you about Roman law. Not mockingly, genuinely curious. He wants to know how inheritance works. Not because he wants to follow it. Because he's preparing for a world where he might need to write his own. Historians still ask why Rome fell. Barbarians? Plague? Money? Morals? You think it started here, with the cracks, the slow leaks, the trust that the walls would always hold, even as moss grew between the stones, even as men stopped marching with pride and started marching for pay. One day, a delegation comes to the fort. You recognize one of them, older now, but unmistakable. He once threw stones at your patrol. Now he wears a Roman fibula and carries a scroll. He doesn't smile. He doesn't bow. He says, "You taught us how to rule. We listened. And now we're ready to speak." You don't answer, because the truth sits in your stomach like cold wine. They didn't steal your empire. They inherited it, not by force, but by filling the silence. That night, you sit by the fire and stare at the horizon. No drums, no screams, just wind. And you realize something. You're not on the border of Rome. Rome is now on the border of something else. There's no alarm, no horn, no great thunder of hooves announcing the end. Just the quiet realization that the wall no longer matters. Because now, the borders melt. It begins like fog, software, unseen. Men vanish, towns empty, watch posts go silent. At first they call them desertions, then bandits, then disruptions. But you know the rhythm of rot. And this is collapse. One morning, the gates don't open. No key, no officer to give the command. Just rust, swollen wood, and too many men missing. You climb the parapet, look east. There's movement in the trees. Slow, steady, deliberate. It's not an army. Not exactly. There are no ranks, no trumpets, no uniform. But it is organized. And worse, it is calm. Men with furs and blades, yes, but also carts. Families. Wagons full of the future. You hear names again, but not as threats. As announcements. Alemanni, Goths, Franks, Vandals. Not whispers this time. Not stories told in fear. Just facts. They're here. And they're not leaving. The officers call for reinforcement. None come. They write to Rome. No reply. Because Rome? Rome is busy with itself. Civil wars, uprisings, an emperor poisoned, another stabbed, a third who apparently thinks he's Hercules. You'd laugh if you had any humor left. But now's not the time. The men at your post start to scatter. Some take bribes. Some just walk away. Others join the tribes, swear loyalty, marry, vanish into forests they once patrolled. You don't blame them, because the center has gone hollow. And when the center hollows out, everything else slides. You stay, not out of loyalty, but out of inertia. What else would you do? You've been walking this wall your entire life, and now the wall is melting. Historians will call this the migration period. They'll say whole peoples moved. They'll talk about pressures from the Huns, about food, about politics. But to you, it doesn't feel like migration. It feels like inheritance. The roads are still there, but they carry different boots now. The outposts still stand, but the flags are different. And in the markets, Latin is still spoken, but not yours. Changed, bent, shaped by new mouths. One morning, a boy passes you on the road. Tall, blonde, wears a Roman tunic and a tribal knife. He nods, not fearfully, not mockingly, just as an equal. Later that day, you walk through what used to be a Roman camp. You see carvings, not vandalism, not destruction, just edits. Eagles reshaped into wolves, laurels woven into antlers. It's not desecration, it's conversion. You find a helmet, not yours, just lying in the dirt. You pick it up. It smells like pine. You set it on a stone and walk away, because no one wears that kind of memory anymore. Your last order comes by courier, a thin scroll, no seal. It reads, "Withdraw if possible, defend if necessary, disband if prudent." You fold it, put it in the fire. Watch the flame flicker once, then vanish. The fort empties. The world doesn't end. It just shifts. The tribes don't burn it. They just move in, fix the roof, repaint the door, settle. One man, you think he was a Roman scout once, now leads a mixed group of settlers. He invites you to share bread, speaks in a strange blend of Latin and tribal tongue, says they're calling this new place New Border. You ask, whose border? He shrugs, says, no one's, or maybe everyone's. You walk into the woods that night. No armor, no orders, just the sound of wind through trees. And it feels like home. For the first time. It's quiet when it happens. No thunder, no blood-drenched sun or shattering of the heavens. Just the sound of footfalls over stone and hooves clicking softly down Roman roads that no longer belong to Rome. The Visigoths don't scream when they enter. They walk. They move through the city like water through a cracked dam. And the eternal city is breached. You're not there. Not exactly. You're far from it now, but the news reaches even the deepest forests, even the quietest valleys, even the old posts where Roman eagles once cast long shadows. Rome, the city, the idea, the dream, has been sacked. You hear the rumors first. That can't be right. They must have meant a village outside. No army could do that. Then comes the confirmation, and with it, the silence. Because no one thought it was possible. Not really. Not even you. Even after the legions fell, after the borders broke, after the emperors came and went like tavern candles, still there was Rome. But now, you picture the Capitoline Hill in smoke. You imagine sandals slipping in blood where senators used to argue. And it doesn't feel real. It feels like a myth in reverse. You're staying in a village near the Danube, mixed people, Roman roads under tribal homes, children who speak Latin with thick accents and worship gods whose names you don't recognize. Half Jupiter, half oak. You sit in the square when the messenger arrives. A young man on a battered mule, dust in his teeth. He says only, "The city is broken," and no one asks which one. Historians still debate how bad it was, how much burned, how many died, whether Alaric meant to destroy or just to demand respect. Some say the sack was measured, deliberate. Others say it was chaos. But the truth? Rome fell with the doors still open. There's no single act that breaks an empire. Not one flame. Not one sword. It's 100 little cracks, spreading slowly. Then suddenly, the floor gives out and everyone falls at once. You've seen it. You walked it. The strange part is what comes next. Stillness. Not triumph. Not mourning. Just breathing. Because when something that big collapses, the world doesn't end. It just waits. You watch the village adjust. No panic. No riots. They keep planting. Keep trading. A young woman paints over an old Roman symbol with a new one, not to destroy it, just to layer. Like sediment. You sit by a well. A boy joins you, 8 years old, pale eyes, fur-lined boots. He asks if the stories are true. Was Rome really made of gold? You think for a long time. Then say, it was made of roads, of ideas, of law, and people forgot to carry those things when they ran. He nods slowly, then says, maybe we build something new. You almost laugh, but you don't, because maybe. That's the point. Later that week, a man arrives wearing Roman armor with a tribal axe strapped across his back. He speaks both languages, offers both coins and gifts, claims he represents the new order. He smiles a lot, and every time he does, you hear the last breath of a statue. You go for a walk, through fields that used to be checkpoints, down a path that once bore legionary boots. You pass a villa, half-collapsed, ivy-bound, children playing where the dining room once stood. And you realize, Rome didn't die. It was absorbed. Every border is now a memory. Every law a negotiation. And the men with swords, they write scrolls now. Their hands still stained, but also calloused from building. One traveler tells you the Goths now hold court in old senatorial chambers, that horses sleep where senators once schemed, that the old Roman calendar still marks the days, but no one follows it. It's like watching a lion wear a toga. A little funny, a little terrifying. You wonder what Augustus would say, what Varus would say, what the ghosts of Teutoburg would scream if they could still claw through the moss and mud. But the only answer you hear is birdsong. One day, a caravan passes through the village. Visigoths, merchants, a few Roman scribes, still working, still writing, still adapting. One of them sees your old insignia. He nods. You nod back, and nothing else needs to be said. This isn't your world anymore. but you're still in it. And that's enough. You walk slower now. Not from pain, though there's plenty of that, but from something else. A kind of reverence, like every footstep might crack open a memory. You tread old roads with care, roads that no longer lead to garrisons or glory, but to farms, to silence, to children playing where banners once flew. And you wonder, what did the Empire forget? The answer isn't in books. It's in the space between ruins, in the moss on a column, in the laughter echoing through a half-collapsed bathhouse where goats now nap beside cold mosaics. Rome didn't fall in a day. It forgot itself piece by piece. You remember what it used to be. The discipline, the order, the belief that if you followed the plan, sharpened the sword, marched the mile, obeyed the standard, everything would hold. But then the trees moved, and the eagles fell, and all the marble in the world couldn't stop mud from climbing the walls. The final lesson isn't about battle. Not really. It's about blindness. Rome saw the forest, but not the people in it. Saw the tribes, but not their patience. Saw the customs, but not the meaning beneath them. It thought conquest was conversion. It thought walls could think. It believed it could shape the world with stone. But the world shapes back. You watch a young man now, part Roman, part not, teaching children to write. Not Latin exactly. Not tribal script either. Something new. Letters like ivy, familiar but tangled. He speaks in rhythms you don't recognize. And you smile. Because the forest didn't just break the empire. It rewrote it. Historians will argue forever. Was it Teutoburg? Corruption? Barbarian migration? Economic strain? They'll dissect timelines and tax codes and treaties. But they'll miss the quiet moments. The slow fade. The failure to listen. You think about Arminius sometimes. How he learned Latin, wore the armor, knew the law, and still turned against it. Not out of madness, out of clarity. He didn't betray Rome. He revealed it, showed the mirror. And Rome turned away. They say Arminius died betrayed. By his own people, stabbed in the back. No crown, no empire. But maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe he didn't want to rule. Maybe he just wanted to break the pattern and leave space for something wilder, more honest. You find the edge of the forest one morning, a ridge overlooking what was once a border. There's no signpost, no guard, just wind, and the faint smell of pine and charcoal and memory. You sit, close your eyes, and remember what you were. A cog in an empire, a soldier in a system, a man taught never to question the road. And now you're just a witness to what happens when empires forget to adapt, when they build higher walls instead of deeper roots, when they fear the dark instead of learning to walk in it. What the empire forgot was humility, the simple truth that no power lasts, that every eagle falls eventually, that every map fades if you forget to draw the people on it. But you remember the mud, the drums, the silence before the scream, the face of the forest, not cruel, not kind, just patient. You open your eyes and see not ruins, but seeds. You sit beneath a tree now. No banners, no orders, just the rustle of leaves above and the slow breath of the earth beneath you. The story is done, not because it ended, but because it changed shape, became quieter, softer, less about conquest, more about continuity, less about Rome, more about the roots that grew up beneath it, unnoticed, patient. Let it rest now. Let the sword sleep. Let the wolves curl up under stars that no longer judge. The world has moved on. The tribes who once hid in the trees now raised cities. The lines drawn in blood are faded into dirt paths, walked by children with no memory of eagles, of gladius drills, of marching songs that once shook the continent. You remember them, though, and that's enough. Someone has to. Let your mind drift now, like a river in twilight. Drift past the broken shields and painted faces, past the Latin chants and forest drums, past the clash, past the silence after the clash, to that softest place in history, where a memory no longer wounds, it just lingers. A shadow, a scent of pine, a whisper from old soil. You did not make the world, but you walked it. You did not win the wars, but you heard them. And now, in the stillness, with the torch dimming and the air cooling, you can let go. Not forget, never forget. Just loosen your grip. Let the march slow. Let the stories breathe. Out there, somewhere beyond the ridge, the forest still stands. Not waiting, not haunting, just being. Like it always was, like it always will. And now, as your breath slows and your thoughts untangle like old thread, remember this. Empires may fall, but stories drift on the wind. So close your eyes. Lay down the armor. Let the night come in. The trees are watching. But tonight, they mean you no harm.